Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Get in Tune. As usual, I'm Michael Gracia. I'm here, and tonight I got something a little different than comics, but it falls into the same genre. Well, some of the genre there. I'm going to be talking with a fantasy writer, and I'm going to bring her on in a moment. But just to give you a background on why I wanted to talk to a fantasy writer who doesn't write comics, although I might ask her why not and if she's ever going to. That's always a fun question. But I'm a huge fantasy guy. I've loved it since I was a kid. When I was a kid, I wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. I had no one to play with, but I read the books. I read the comics. Behind me, I don't know if you can see. I always have my superhero pictures, but behind me, there's I have some artwork of I think that's Gandalf back there. I can't really tell, but every wall has some kind of fantasy piece, whether it's related to Lord of the Rings, which I'm a big fan of, or not. So, there's something everywhere here, and I love to keep that stuff around. It helps inspire me, the work I do. But let's stop talking about me. Let's bring on tonight's guest, fantasy author Kate Seger.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
And before we get started, let's just add where people can find you, which is Kate Seger Author, and that's on Facebook there. So when you guys out there watching, at any point, if you have questions, feel free to ask the questions. Both Kate and I I'm happy to ask, and I'm sure she's happy to answer. So first of all, thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm interested in things that are non-comic related that like I said, that fall into the genres I love, and I think Get in Tune itself doesn't just have to be about cartooning. It could be about the things that kind of revolve around it, and fantasy is a big genre within the cartooning world. But you don't do comics, and we'll maybe find out why later. Whoops. And but first, I want to find out a little bit about your background, not just your background as a writer, but let's go back into like your childhood. What got you into fantasy? Do you remember? Was it a novel? Was it a movie? What was it that sparked your interest in the fantasy genre?
Well, when I was like 10, I stole The Dark Tower from my dad's bookshelf, which is like Stephen King's fantasy book, like not horror really, it's basically fantasy. And that was really the first fantasy book I read. And that immediately like got me hooked. And it was one of those series, I don't know if you know Dark Tower, it took like a million years for him to finish writing it. So throughout my entire childhood and adolescence, I was like waiting to find out what happens. So that was torturous. And then after that, I read Lord of the Rings. So those were probably the two formative things that I read when I was like young that got me into it.
Okay, that's cool. I gotta say, I've never read Lord of the Rings. Well, no matter how much I love it, it's more of a movie and artwork. Like I've seen tons of art from it, and I'll tell you why I didn't read it. I've had
it's long and wordy.
Well, I grew up with a reading problem, so it was hard for me to read those type of books. I didn't read The Hobbit till I was maybe in college, and that was a much shorter, easier read. I did try Lord of the Rings, and I finally, by that time, I knew what my reading problem was. I knew how to deal with it, but I'm like, I'm not dealing with it with this book. It's just
It's actually like it's written in a way that's really annoying. Like as a writer, when I read it now, I'm like, Jesus, what are all these words here for? Like, why did you have to make this so like drawn out? So it's not just you. It's not, unless you're like super into it, it's not a really grab you book.
Well, it's the thing. I love the genre, so and my also other problem is, unfortunately, I don't read as much novels or those type of books that are fantasy. Although I'm into them and I want to read them, my issue is, as an artist, as an educator, I'm always teaching about comics and storytelling. I live in a fantasy world. I have to make believe, you know some of my characters, but like with my character Plunge Pup, I got to make you believe that a dog can fight crime with a magic plunger. So for me, I'm living in crazy fantasy worlds all the time. So when I read, I usually try to find like biographies and things like that. But sorry, my light. But I really want to get into reading some fantasy, and I think I'm your book, from the way you described it when we talked a while ago, not the current one, but the first book, I was very interested in it. So I'm probably gonna have to order a copy very soon. I just want to let you know that.
It's a lot shorter than Lord of the Rings, so.
And that's one of the things that makes me want to read it. So let's get back a little bit into your childhood. So you were reading Stephen King, The Dark Tower. What other fantasy books besides like Tolkien and Stephen King did you read and that you enjoyed as a kid?
Well, I liked all the Chronicles of Narnia books, even though I had no idea that they have all that religious symbolism at the time. I learned that much later as an adult. Even like The Secret Garden when I was even younger, like I loved The Secret Garden, just that whole, and I write a lot of portal fantasy, and I think that comes from that, the idea of being stepping into another world.
Yeah.
I'm like, gee, what did I read when I was younger? Like drawing a blank. Yeah, those are the main ones. I mean, in like 1996, when Game of Thrones came out, I was in like high school, and I started reading the Game of Thrones book when I was in high school. That's another series that has tortured me because, as we all know, there's no ending.
Yeah. Well, I didn't watch the ending. I know he hasn't written one yet. It hasn't come out yet, right?
Oh, and don't watch the one on the series. It's awful.
I had an issue. My wife watched the entire series. I watched, I think, the first maybe season or 2 seasons with her, but I had trouble with the world building in the way the show was put together, that I'm just like, I can't watch it. I really wanted to, but I felt the world building was off.
It was especially off compared to, I actually liked the show, but the books are completely different from the show.
Yeah. Always are.
The world building was much stronger in the books, but they had more space to do that, My husband I would be watching it, and he would just ask me to let him know when the brothel scenes were on so he could come watch the the brothel scenes. So that's how into it he was.
Well, everybody has their likes, right?
He was like, the show sucks. Just call me the brothels in.
Did you and just continuing again with your childhood, were you into the fantasy movies that came out? Because I mean, you grew up, throughout the 80s and 90s. You were a kid in the 80s, a teen in the 90s. Any fantasy movies that stuck out that you think would be that kind of inspire some of what you do?
Well, I write young adult fantasy for the most part. Like, it's geared towards young adults, and most of my protagonists are like adolescent girls with powers. Okay. And I think that comes from like the whole like She-Ra, like Sailor Moon, Gem and the Holograms kind of like thing, like that was the kind of stuff I was into. We weren't really that into movies when I was a kid, because like, they were still on VHS and stuff, and but we watched a lot of shows. Yeah. She-Ra was my favorite. I have a couple She-Ra shirts around here somewhere. I think I wore mine on our last thing.
Yeah, on the last call we did on the Predacon stuff. Actually, speaking of She-Ra, have you watched the new series on Netflix?
I have not.
You have not? Okay, I was just curious on your opinion if you've seen it.
I'm a little bit afraid to, because I have such a deep ingrained love for the original She-Ra that I don't want to be disappointed.
Yeah. I will say, for me, I watched the first season when I was homesick. It was enough to watch in like a day. And I don't think I was the target audience for it. I won't say it was a bad show. I just wasn't the target audience for it, so I didn't continue with the show. But I grew up on all that Filmation, the He-Man, and another thing that I loved as a kid, I had the toys of. I used to play with them. I used to draw a lot of that stuff. So that's a big influence on me, that whole Filmation library. And I'd watch She-Ra, and I have some on DVD somewhere in my closet over there. So, it's not like I still don't watch it. I enjoy those type of things. But yeah, I kind of just love the original stuff too. So, But
That's why I don't want to taint my palate with the new stuff. It's
yeah,
never as good.
exactly. I understand. Yeah, no, I mean, because when the reason I was asking about movies and stuff, because I was like, yo, I watched a lot more television than I did movies, but the movies that came out in the 80s specifically in the fantasy world, and you're talking movies like,
Well, I liked
you know,
Labyrinth.
yeah, I was about to say Labyrinth
Yeah,
came
there's some
out.
good ones.
What else was good? You know, Neverending Story. Like they don't make movies like
Mhm.
that anymore. Where or even something like Goonies, you know, which
That's
wasn't
Bride.
yeah, Princess Bride. None of those
That's
type
Bride.
we'll never see movies like that. It was an interesting genre, well, an interesting time for the genre and the way
Hmm.
those movies were made, you know. And I think, and for me specifically, those are a lot of the movies I watched as a kid that inspired me in the fantasy genre. For but TV shows, you know, I watched anything. You know, I was a big sci-fi fan, but whatever was on, you know, I mean, I loved the movies like Conan and all those things that came out. Uh,
Xena. Xena
Xena,
was my favorite.
well, that was the thing. In the 90s, you had, you know, talking just about, since you do female, mostly female lead characters, you know, people don't realize. I know today it's a very popular thing. You should always have kind of like a strong female lead, but we grew up in an era where, you know, we look at just Star Wars. Princess Leia just needed the door open. Once a door was open, she took control. You know,
Hmm.
she was a very strong female character. You know, we had Wonder Woman TV series. You know, we had you know, like you mentioned, She-Ra, Gem and the Holograms. In the 90s, you get Xena, you get Buffy, and those shows, all major strong female leads. I don't think there was a decade that we grew up in, you know, starting in the 70s, that didn't have a strong female lead on the TV somewhere. You know, the Bionic Woman in the 70s and things that ran even into the 80s that we would watch and rerun. Um, so I mean, I tend to, I try to put strong female leads in my stories, but I tend to write more male driven, and I think that's just because I'm a man,
Yeah,
and
that's
I know
normal.
how to I know how to do that. But when I try to write a woman, I look back to those characters and like, what did I like about those characters that made them strong to me and that made them feel, hey, these characters are really great, that I need to watch them.
Hmm.
And you know, and read about, like now Captain Marvel is, you know, very popular, but she used to be a character called Miss Marvel. I used to read her comic book, you know, as a kid. So, you know, all these things were just out there, and they were there, and they were just amazing stuff. And and they're definitely what inspired what we got now. But yeah, I don't my unfortunately, and I'm sad to say, I don't tend to write females as well as I would like to. But obviously it's a strong suit for you, and which is great. And one of the reasons we're going to be talking about your book in a moment.
It's
So
okay. When I write men, I sometimes am like, would a guy actually do this? Or is this my woman coming out in the guise of a man?
yeah, it's very hard, you know. You know, it's for, you know, they say as an artist, it's always hard to draw the opposite sex, because you know what you look like when you go take your shower. You know what you look like before you get dressed. You know where everything is. You know where everything falls. And no matter how much you think you know about the opposite sex, you're not going to learn how to draw the human body until you sit in a life drawing class and look at
Hmm.
them. And I feel it's the same thing with kind of with writing. We don't have a life drawing class for writing the opposite sex, you know. So it's, we got to really use our imagination and say, how would that character? So we got to look at the strong female leads that we grew up with, and whether that was a role model in our family for us, or someone like Xena, that we, you know, that's where we're pulling it from, you know.
I just want to point out for
Yeah.
any aspiring male writers,
Mhm.
there's actually a Facebook group, and it's like how not to write women in literature. And it's
Oh,
all the ridiculous things men have written about women in literature and how not to write women badly.
okay. All right. I'll have to maybe check that out. just for fun.
It is fun. It's a silly group, but it's funny.
Okay. Now let me just ask you about that group real quick. Is it where it's just mostly women, like kind of making fun of how other people written? I'm just curious. Or is
No,
it
you know what it
men
mostly
actually
is?
legitimately in there asking questions?
Sometimes men will ask questions. It's mostly like people will find excerpts in books where men write things like, she breasted boobily up to the stall while her thighs covered, and we're like, there's no such thing as breasting boobily.
Yeah,
So
I don't know if you saw my face. I was very confused. Look, just
that's an actual line from an actual book, and it was from like not some random person. It was like, I can't remember who it was, but it was a
wow.
traditionally published author. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
it's more making fun of than anything else.
Okay. I won't be writing like that. Don't worry about that.
I hope
Plus,
not.
I write very like kid teen books.
Mhm.
That's my genre. It's basically PG-13. So it's
That's where I am too, actually. I fade to black before anything too graphic
yeah.
happens.
Growing up, I always found it more interesting to what's the word I'm looking for? Not to see everything happen, you know, just to kind of use my imagination. So, like if you're watching a movie and a murder's about to happen, and it, you know, instead of seeing the gruesome murder, you just see like somebody holding a knife and then an arm
Mhm.
fall on the ground. I like that because then I can use my imagination. Unless they say, well, he stabbed them 17 times, you know, in the stomach or whatever. You know, you don't
Like
know.
the shower scene in Psycho where you just see the silhouette.
Let me just tell you a quick Psycho story since you brought that up. And it has freaked me out. And occasionally I'll still kind of have dreams and it'll freak me out to this day. I was at, I think it was Universal Studios down in Florida, and they had this like, you know, show where you can go see that scene, like famous movie scenes reenacted. And they showed how they did that. Now, obviously the girl was in a nude suit and in the shower, but they had a guy, and I was sitting like in the, I think it was the front row or second row, and they had the guy dressed in the gown and the wig, but instead of being able to see his face, he had this just black like mesh mask. You couldn't really see anything. And he comes running down the side of the stairs, you know, for effect. And I had to be maybe, I don't know, if I was 13, that was old for me. And this guy was just standing there, and he comes up and he just stops like and turns right in front of me, and he's standing over with the knife, and I could just see the mask like breathing. You can't make out his face. There's just some weird features, and I just had nightmares for the longest time
That
just
sounds
because of that.
traumatizing.
And then occasionally, and now that I brought it up in my head, I probably have it tonight. But it's one of those things
My
where,
fault.
no, it's okay. It just pops in, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't. You know, I can't.
It's just there.
So, so before we get into your books, what you started writing at a young age, or when did you start writing? Would you say
I was very young. I was maybe like 10,
10?
something like
So
that.
when you got your hands on the Dark Tower,
Yeah, around that same time.
around that same,
Like
and
I was a reader I was a very young reader, and like, you know, I was a very avid reader when I was young. And I would just like on car trips, I'd sit in a car trip and it'd be like a 6-hour car trip. And I'd just sit in the back of the car the whole time writing. And then we get there, and because the car was moving, I'd be like, I can't even read this because I have very bad handwriting to this day. I have awful handwriting. So couple that with a moving car. It was
yeah.
like, great. I just wrote 74 pages in a spiral bound notebook and I can read 3 of them. But you know, I remember on car trips, I couldn't have been more than 10 when I would just write the whole trip.
Wow, that's
I've
interesting.
always I've
No, go
always
ahead.
just been compelled to do it. Like it's just like force of habit,
Yeah.
force of
And
nature.
were you writing fantasy back then, or were you just writing anything that kind of popped into your head?
Well, I think my first stories were based on the soap operas that I used to watch with my mom as a child.
You
Because
mind
there was a
sharing what
lot
soap operas?
of there was a lot of like people having multiple relationships with people, and then like husbands throwing wives down staircases, and then they get resurrected like 3
Wow.
scenes. There was a lot of like all my children going on in
Okay.
my first stories. Um But I did start writing fantasy fairly early in my writing ventures, and my mother was always like, "Why can't you write something normal?"
And that's what my mother would say about my drawings. You know, like my mom would, you know, but she didn't get what I was doing, so she's like, I don't
I
understand.
think you should write no romance. No, stop. I want to read about fairies.
Um, so okay, so you were a teen and you wrote throughout, you know, school and into high school and obviously after. When was your first published piece and what was it?
I had a story, and I can't even remember the name of the place it was published now, but I'm sure it hasn't existed in like 20 years. When I was, again, like I was in grade school, so I don't even know exactly what grade, maybe middle school, but I wasn't in high school yet. And
Yeah.
it was about a girl. It was kind of like Lassie with Parrots. We might have talked about this last time, but maybe not.
Well, this doesn't sound familiar to me, so go ahead.
Maybe not. Um, yeah, it was like this kid, and there was like the tsunami coming, and like the parrot was kind of like Lassie. Like the parrot warned her that like the tsunami was coming, and like the parrot rescued her, and then the brother was out on a boat. And anyway, that piece was published in some like stories for kids magazine, which my mother probably still has in a box somewhere because she saves everything. That was the first thing. And then I won the Greenberg kids section of their poetry contest like 2 years when I was in middle school. So
Okay.
that was
And
those
you're
were my
talking
youngest.
like Greenberg, New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking, okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, not like Greenland or like anything
I'm
major.
just making sure for those watching, you know, I don't know, you know, people may not know where you are, or not that you have to say where you are. We don't want people coming to your home or anything, but
I'm not that worried about stalkers. My dog is pretty intimidating, even though she'll only lick you to death.
so so from there, so you started early with published work, which is great. Um and when was your first, like, I don't want to say that wasn't real, but like when you were in like a book of some sort, or you know, like maybe a mainstream magazine, or not mainstream, but you know what I mean, like a magazine or a book where it was more widely distributed than, you know, the kids piece.
I was in like an anthology, which again, I don't remember the name of. It was some like National Library of Poetry, something or other. Um, and that was when I was in like ninth grade. And then I was also in like Two River View, which is like it's not super famous, but it's a pretty well respected literary magazine. And that was in like 11th or 12th grade. So in high school, I was submitting stuff.
That's great.
Yeah, and then there's another one. I can't remember what all these publications were called, but there was another one in high school that I was really excited that I got into because it was like one of those ones that you had to, you know, they used to have that big book. I don't know if you know this, but there used to be this giant book. Now it's on the internet, and it had listings for all the different like literary
Yeah,
magazines.
they have it for artists. For artists, it's something called the Artist and Graphic Designer Notebook or something.
Yeah,
Or
something like
Workbook or
that.
something. Then they have one for, I know they had one for children authors and illustrators, and yeah, they're different books for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that giant book, I like went through and mailed like hundreds of copies of my poems to places in that book. So I think two of them wound up accepting pieces. So that was
That's cool.
when I was in high school. I was like, I'm awesome. I'm famous. I'm Sylvia Plath. Which is not really someone to aspire to be because she stuck her head in an oven, but I always liked Sylvia Plath's poetry.
um, okay, so let's fast forward some time. You are starting. You've actually, and before we get into your books, which I want to do in a minute, you're actually now currently working as a freelance writer and editor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, both, or just or one of them?
Both.
And that's just a recent change for you. So you've been what word do I want to use? So, well, you've definitely been busy enough that you didn't need a normal 9 to 5 anymore, that you could move on.
Yeah. I'm actually like super busy, and
Mhm.
I have a problem because I really, really love doing it. Although I'm trying to get away from the writing and stick more to the editing. I'm trying to like wean the writing people off because I
Mhm.
find I don't have time to work on my own stuff when I'm
Yeah.
writing everyone else's stuff. So I'm trying to be like, listen, this is going to be my last writing assignment. um, but yeah, I don't have to have set boundaries.
Mhm.
Like I like doing it so much that I'm like, oh, like I just worked for like 15 straight hours because it didn't really feel like work, which is good because I'm busy, but it's also like maybe I should like have like a real life too.
Yeah, I have the same issue as a freelancer. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we were just saying we just love to draw. That's it. It's not that we don't want to create good stories, which we do, and that's part of it. But it's like, I just want to illustrate stuff. I just want to draw. Just give me something to draw, and I'm happy. And it doesn't matter if I spend 15 hours at my drawing table or on my computer drawing, and I could be exhausted. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
how exhausted I am. I'm happy
I
at
don't want
what
to
I'm
stop.
doing.
You
And
know,
and you know what I end up doing? I end up leaving my studio to go sit on the couch with my wife, and I bring my drawing pad with me. I don't even stop after 15. Yeah,
I
like,
know my husband says the same thing because I'll be sitting on the couch editing and he's like, it's like 11 o'clock. And then he'll be like, it's like 2 in the morning. And I'm like, oh, is it? But I love sentence structure, and I could just sit there and read and fix people's sentence structure forever and be like completely content doing it.
let me ask, since you're talking about editing, do you edit your own books, or do you have someone else edit for you?
I edit
Mhm.
and then I give it to beta readers, and then they tell me what I screwed up, and then I
Okay.
re-edit, fixing whatever I screwed up, and then I have a friend who proofreads for me.
Okay. Yeah,
So
'cause
I do not trust my own eyes as the only set of eyes.
okay.
But I try to do the bulk of it before I give it to a
Yeah.
proofreader. She
Well,
just
they
has to keep
they they
it.
say that you should never edit your own work anyway,
It's
and
impossible. You can't do it right.
yeah. I just wrote a children's book and illustrated it. It's technically done. There's a few little tweaks I want to do, and there's one word I need to fix, because for me, when I wrote it, I know what it's supposed to sound like. But when I typed it in, I didn't type in the abbreviation of the word, like the little short version. I typed in the full word, which throws off the rhyming structure of it. And
Hmm.
I'm like, and someone pointed that out to me, but to me, I would constantly read it with the abbreviation.
That's what the problem is. Your eyes see what you like think should be there, especially
Yeah,
after like the 17th time you've read it.
exactly,
Like, yeah.
exactly.
So yeah,
So,
you always need a second set of eyes.
um, and I guess you're loving editing, and you're loving all that stuff. And since you love it so much and you're putting in all this time, when do you find time for yourself to work on your own stuff?
That's my problem. That's why I'm trying to shift away from writing and more into editing, because I've actually been doing a lot of ghostwriting, and
Mhm.
it's great to write these stories and get paid for them, but like my name's not on it, and then I have nothing left like
Yeah,
creatively to write my own stuff.
yeah,
So that's why I'm trying to focus more on editing and less on ghostwriting, because and ghostwriting is a pain in the neck. Like people never are clear about what they want, and then they're like, "Oh, this isn't what I wanted," and I'm like, we have like hours of discussions. One woman, she she told me she was a Christian when we went through her characters. And I'm like, okay, she's a Christian. So I'll have them celebrate Christmas in this one book that takes place in the winter. And then I turned into her and she's like, oh, my family are Jehovah Witnesses. We can't have Christmas celebrations. And I'm like, really? I just wrote like a whole book about Christmas. And we're on the fourth book by this point. At no point in time did it occur to you to tell me that she's a Jehovah Witness.
yeah. That's
It's
you know
annoying
those
sometimes.
yeah, those things happen, and I get it. As a freelancer myself, you always have those clients who aren't always 100% clear, and it's crazy. But like you said, if it's the work you enjoy. Now, let me just ask you a question about ghostwriting. You have to write in the style of the author, correct? Or So
Well,
do you find
it
changing writing?
depends.
Okay.
Sometimes the person hasn't published at all and they just have a story that they want to tell and they're not a writer, or they are non-English speaking, or not English as a first language or whatever, and they just want a story told.
Mhm.
And then you can write however the heck you want, as long as you tell their story and they're happy with it. But yeah, if you're writing for someone who already has an existing series, then you have to read their books,
Mhm.
figure out like how they write, and then try to imitate them.
And do you find that difficult?
No, this is why I can't read while I'm writing, because I pick up people's styles like instantly, and then I'll start writing my own stuff in their style. So like if
Okay.
I'm writing fantasy, I have to read something completely not fantasy, or otherwise I will start writing like that author instead of writing like me. I like suck up people's styles like a sponge.
Yeah, I tend to have that thing with art. I'll watch a cartoon or I'll read a comic, all of a sudden I'm just drawing their style, and it's away from what I'm like, I just lost an hour of work because I've been reading Scrooge McDuck and now I'm drawing Disney ducks, and I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not my style of Plunger Pup, or something, and
Yeah.
I have to change that. And but yeah, so anyway, moving on, let's get a little bit into your books now, because I do want to talk about some other stuff with process and things for you. But I really, we've hit the halfway mark. Like I said, I usually do about an hour, and we're already 30 minutes in, and
Nice.
I wanna at least talk about your book. So before we get into the new book, which is The Last Dreamer, tell us about the first book, because this is the second book in a series called The Ethereal Realm.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us a little bit about the Ethereal Realm series, what the first book, you don't have to go into detail, but what the first book is about, and tell us about it. You know.
Well, the Ethereal Realms is like a divided world where mortals live on one side of the veil and fairies and elves and other fantastical creatures like that live on the other side of the veil. The veil was created to protect the mortals when like the Fae were waging a war against them generations ago, and that's backstory that has nothing to do with anything. That's my world building coming out. Anyway,
Okay.
the actual story is about a young, probably, I never give her an actual age, but let's say she's around like 19-year-old female main character who gets kidnapped by the Fae and carried over to the magical side of the ethereal realms. And she is basically they're convinced that she is the answer to some prophecy, and she's going to save them against this evil Queen of Shadows who's trying to conquer the realm. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, I am just like a chick from the not magical side of the world, and I don't know why you guys dragged me here. And then the whole book is basically her like finding herself and figuring out on like a real level of like, am I actually this prophecy person? And also in a level of like, who is Arianette as a person? So it's kind of got that coming of age thing going on. Yeah, and figuring out Arianette, that's the main character.
That's
Arianette.
interesting. Okay. No, and I gotta say, you've liked that name for a long time.
I was just gonna say that that name is like a name from a role-playing game I started playing when I was like 12, and it is carried through lots of my stories.
Okay, because I gotta say this. For those who don't know, Kate is a friend of mine. I've known her for years, and years ago when we were hanging out, we used to share and read stories, and I wrote stuff, a true life story about about friends of mine and part of my life, and she was in the story, and you asked me to call that your character Arianette.
Oh, did I really? I don't even remember that. That's so funny.
I remember that because I was just.
I'm not surprised by it. That has been like my character.
Yeah.
So as you can tell, Arianette in my book is very heavily influenced by me.
Excuse me. Yeah. No. So, and the only reason I remember that is because I was going through old files and I found that old script and I just reread it, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, that's Kate.
That's so funny. Well, anyway, I reused that name and made it my main character. I've been trying to get her to be a character in a book for like decades. I finally did it. Um,
Great.
anyway, so yeah,
Yeah. So you were telling us anything else you want to share about the first book, or?
no, that's basically the whole idea of it. There's like a short story and a novella that kind of bookend it, which are not really related, but they're kind of cool if you read the first book to get like what's going on in the rest of the world while the story's happening.
Okay. Now let's get to the second book, the new one, The Last Dreamer, book 2 of the Ethereal Realm. Okay, give us your pitch. If you have like, do you have a log line for the book that you can give us, or?
I do, and now I can't think of it. It's on the cover, and I'm like, what is that thing? Oh, everyone is forced to choose a side.
Okay, everyone's forced. So now we're talking. Now, again, I haven't read the book. I remember when we first talked about the first book when it came out, I was interested in it. I still am interested in it. It's not one of those things I just say. It's just comes down to my schedule of and what do I want to read and when.
I have so many books that I want to read that, like, if I showed you my bookshelf and told you the percentage of them that I've actually read, it's like embarrassing. So I completely understand.
It's the same thing. Like, I'll just move behind me here, and I got all this. The top up here is just comic strips, things like Peanuts, Hagar the Horrible. I'll pull them out. I'll read 5, 10, 15 pages. I put them back. I pull out another one. I've never read one of these books straight through yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Then, I got the art of books over here and all these things. And, how often do I read? I mean, they're great, but I'm really at inspiration.
I want to read them all, but like, I don't have time to read all these books and also write books and edit books. And so I understand.
What I've decided to start doing is pulling a book, and at night before bed, I read a chapter in it. So whether it's some kind of novel. Right now, and I mentioned Scrooge earlier. I'm rereading Don Rosa's The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, which is one of my favorite comic books, and I'm a big Scrooge fan. He's my favorite Disney character, and I grew up reading Scrooge comics. So for me, it's just fun. So now I'm reading an issue a night in this trade. Mm-hmm. And then I'll take another book and I'll be like, okay, let me get through that. And whether it's a chapter a night, 10 page, whatever it is, that's my goal, is sit down. If it takes me an hour, it takes me a half hour, whatever, just get through one section and then put it down and focus on something else, like going to sleep.
Yeah. I do a lot of beta reading for my friends too, like, because I have a lot of friends who are writers, obviously. So then I'm like, that's another thing. Like, I can't read these books that people already published when I have these books that my friends are about to publish. That like they read mine, so I can read theirs. So one day I'll get all caught up on all my reading, but not anytime in the near future.
I started looking on YouTube for audiobooks on like tape, if you will, so people are just reading them, and I'll play them in the background so I can, while I'm drawing or something. And
that's one thing I miss about my horrible day job that I hated and no longer work at, is that it was really boring. So I would just wear my hair down and put Bluetooth earphones in and just listen to audiobooks from like the library all day long at work. So I got a lot more reading done, but it sucked. So I'm glad I'm not there.
I'm glad you're not there either. You're doing something you love, which is great. Yeah. So let's get back into book 2. So you said the log line is everyone's got to choose a side, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's got to choose a side. You want to give us a little more info, a little more of a pitch, so we could get people interested?
Basically, the second book takes place after the first battle in this war that has begun within the ethereal realms, and all the characters have kind of been tossed to the wind. Characters who seemed like they were like soulmates and made for life are suddenly on opposing sides of the same war. So there's a lot of, that's the whole everyone is forced to choose a side thing, is that there's a lot of unclarity which side's right and which side's wrong. I'm a big fan of gray areas. I don't really believe in villains. All of my characters are sort of villains, but also some of them are sort of heroes. So there's basically the book starts off with everyone, the tables have turned and no one knows who to trust anymore, and they kind of have to find their way back together and figure
Okay.
out who's actually right and who's actually wrong, because it's very cloudy.
And how many books are you planning for the series?
Well, I've got like 9 novellas that I want to write on the side, but
Oh,
I that's just the little short ones, you know.
yeah,
I
no.
like to write novellas about my side characters, because when I'm writing, my side characters tend to take over my plot, and then I have to be like, wait, you don't belong here. I need to pull all this out and use it later. But 3, I want to do a trilogy for the main story, and then I've
Main
got like
story.
a bunch
Okay.
of side things.
That's interesting. I actually and this is for people who've watched Get in Tune. I've mentioned it before. At sometime next year, I want to release a web comic, whether it's on Webtoon or a site like that, and it's called Dax Photon. It's a sci-fi adventure story, humorous type of thing. And I have someone else writing it for me because I just didn't want to write it. I just really want to draw it. So I've sat down, mostly virtually, with the with the writer, and I've gone over. I said, "This is what has to happen." You know, A, B, C, D. You know, and you know, however you can fit it in. Basically, you're the writer. Do whatever you want with it. Just get my important stuff in there. And if you're, you know, you got to use my characters. If you come up with something that is great, you know, in the sense of a character will use it or whatever, but I don't want like plot changed. Okay.
Mhm.
And he's doing a great job that he's writing it how I asked, in the sense, because it's going to come out weekly, how one page at the last panel on every page would be a page turner, or, you know, you get excited to come back next week. So I'm very excited. But we've been talking about other characters in the story so much that he's like, what's his backstory? And I'll be like, well, I don't have much of one, but this is the gist. And he's like, oh, I want to write a backstory for him. Can we do? And I'm like, well, the idea is to put out a book. I mean, to put out the web thing for 1 day a week, so 52 pages, and then release it with some backup stories, whether it's a couple of Dax stories, 1 or 2 short stories. But now it looks like we might just do short character stories of other characters, because they're just becoming even more interesting than Dax is at points for us.
That's exactly what happened to me. And that's why I was like, I need to write about these characters, because otherwise they're just going to keep invading the story and trying to take it over. So
Yeah.
I like took time out and I wrote a story about like Yelena and Orion, because they don't factor in that heavily. In fact, they don't even show up until the second book. But they were in my head for the whole first book and they were driving me crazy. So I was like, I'm just going to write an origin story about Yelena and Orion so they leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly. So you're planning 3 main books and then 9 novellas to go along
I don't
with
know if
the.
it's actually going to be 9. That
Okay.
was like a random stab in the dark.
Okay.
Several.
Several.
I've got
So
2 so far already published. So we'll see how many more manifest.
and the book officially releases on what date? I forgot.
No,
November
November 15th.
15th. So middle of the month.
Mhm.
And for those who are viewing, the link is in the comments. Just go to that link. You can pre-order the book. Will that link also have a link to the original, to the
You
first
can
book?
just click my name as like the author, and then it'll take
Okay.
you to my Amazon author page, and then yeah, because that
Okay.
pre-order is only for Amazon for right now. I'll
Okay.
probably go here after it comes out, but the
And do
pre-orders
you
only.
go? So you're in other places besides Amazon?
Yeah, I use Ingram Spark.
I'm not
Right
familiar.
now, The Wood Witch's Daughter is actually only on Amazon because I put it on Kindle Unlimited
Hmm.
since it's the first book in the series, to try to
Okay.
convince people to read the series and then get hooked on it and then pay for the rest of the books, because that happens to me all the time where I read a book
Yeah.
free on Kindle Unlimited and then I'm like, now I have to buy the rest of the series.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be sneaky like that, but I'll probably only leave it up there for like 6 months and I'll pull it off and
Okay.
it'll be back on like Kobo and Google Books and Barnes and Noble and stuff.
All right. And those are physical copies or all digital?
Um, the physical copy is in Barnes and Noble and Amazon. The digital copy is right now only in Amazon, but I can physical copies you can put wherever you want. The digital
Yeah.
copies, it's also in like Target, and the physical copies anywhere books are sold. Only online though, not on the shelves.
No, that's great. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about some of the characters. You mentioned a couple already. For those who haven't read the books or the book originally, what tell us about some of the characters, some of the main characters that you feel we are really, we should get to know, that will make us want to read the book. Tell us a little bit about them.
Like my favorite things to do.
Well, yeah, I do. Yeah, we got time. Don't worry, we got time.
I know this is like a rabbit hole.
You want me to give you a number? Pick the top 5, or
no? I'll restrain myself. Well, it's a love triangle, which some people will automatically hate, but it's kind of like the whole book isn't about the love triangle. The love triangle just exists in the book, so
that's good. So your mom, you finally wrote romance for your mother.
Yeah, yeah. It's not exactly what she was implying, but yes, there's a love triangle in the book. So it's basically like Arianette, as we discussed, and then there's her 2 brothers. One is the Sky Lord, who is like the ruler of the fairy court of Sky, and he's kind of like a tragic case of like his family was all killed, but he was the spoiled younger brother and he wasn't supposed to be the ruler. And he became the ruler and was like, fuck it, let's let the kingdom go to hell because I don't care and I don't want to do this. And then his older half brother, who is not fairy nobility on both sides. So even though he's more of like your traditional ruler sort, he obviously can't inherit the throne because there's that whole bloodline thing in fairyland. But he's a very kind of noble, very prideful kind of character. So they're very opposed. They're kind of opposites. And they both are seeking to woo Arianette, who's kind of like, you guys kidnapped me. Like, I'm not really into either of you, at least at the beginning. Like, that's Stockholm syndrome. But as time passes, they begin to I won't say what happens, but there's some conflict between the brothers stemmed by the fact that they both are interested in the first girl. So that's Varric and Braden. So they have some tension. The Queen of the Elves is Morgane, whose name is obviously stolen from Morgan Le Fay. Obviously. I'm really into Camelot, so I stole several names from Camelot.
Are you talking, when you say Camelot, are you talking about the Arthurian mythology, or are you talking about? Okay, I didn't know, maybe it was the play they had. You know what I mean?
Oh no, like the Arthurian mythology.
Was it a play? I know the movie. I know the movie, but was there a play? I don't remember. I know they had Spamalot.
There was. I was actually in the play in high school in Pleasantville. It was called Camelot.
Yeah, that's what I remember. There was a play. I don't remember if it was a musical or not, but I remember
it was a musical. Yep.
Yeah, I think I saw it on like a recorded version on cable when I was younger. Sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
My freshman year. No, it's okay. Now I'm thinking about my freshman year of high school. I still have the poster that everyone signed in my downstairs. But yeah, she's like the queen of the elves, and she's been secreted away and hiding for decades, plotting to retake. Because the elves were the original rulers of the kingdom, and then the Fae conquered it. So she's been plotting to reconquer. She's a very, like we talked about before, gray area character. Very like ends do the ends justify the means? Like her ultimate end goal is actually kind of noble, but she's really shady. So she's an interesting character to write because I get to be all mysterious and like, you know, is this character good or is this character bad? I don't even think I know whether she's good or bad. I haven't made up my mind yet, and I'm 2 books in, so that's Morgane.
Okay.
I'm like, who else?
Yeah, anyone else you wanna?
I guess those are like the major ones. I mean, there's a lot of characters become more important in the second book, but I don't want to talk about them too much for people who are going to read the first book, because then I'll give away things that happen. But yeah, there's like Lorna, who's like supposed to be the ruler of the Shadow Court, but something happens to her and that doesn't happen. So, but she's very, I cried when, on a couple of her scenes. She's very, I don't know. I got very attached to Lorna.
So you get very into your characters, and
Yeah.
you know, it happens as an artist too, drawing and stuff, and you just love
Like,
that.
I'm such a bad person. I just did the most horrible thing to this sweet girl.
Well, it's funny because, you know, I write. I don't write as much as I draw, but I write, and I find, and tell me if this is true for you, but like when I'm writing, to try to make it believable, I at least have to put myself in some way in that situation. If I'm writing happiness, I got to feel happy. If I'm writing sadness, I got to think something sad.
Mhm.
And I've written things where the thought that makes me sad makes me cry, but I'm not
Mhm.
writing something that should be tearful. You
Yep.
know? And,
Yeah, you just have to. Yep. Yep.
yeah. Is that how you do it too, or?
I do that, and I also find that like most of my character, and I discovered this completely by accident. I didn't realize my characters all had so much of me in them until I set up this like storyboard thing in my group, and I
Mhm.
was like, which one are you? And I listed like 4 attributes of each of my characters, and then I looked at it and I was like, I'm all of them. Like, I can't
Yeah,
pick one of these. So
yeah.
yeah, I tend to take different slivers of my own personality and kind of rearrange them into my characters, but I identify with all of them on a pretty deep level. So.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I mean, that shows, number one, how much you care about it, and that you could put yourself, and there's different, and there's so many different sides of you that you can tell a story with. When I do my comic, which I'm bringing back, The Wiz. I don't know if you remember, if you ever read any of those, but The Wiz and Ajax, the two main characters, are me. There's just two different sides of me. And I know the other characters have little bits and pieces in there, but I've tried to base them on people I know. So I kind of think, like, what if I was having a conversation with this person, and if this person and this conversation's pissing me off, well, more than likely Ajax is going to respond because he's the sarcastic
Mm-hmm.
character. And if the Wiz is, that's me being kind of, I could be a bit of a little sarcastic, but it's a little more kind of a nice guy, kind of absent-minded, and that's, so like those are two big parts of me. And I know those characters are me in that story.
Mm-hmm.
Just what side am I, and even when I write, it's like, how do I feel at that moment? Am I feeling
Yep.
sarcastic? And I'm writing Ajax, and that's
Yeah,
that's
that's
what
an
I do.
interesting point because I write in multiple point of view. So it's not all in one character's point of view. And that's, I don't write in order. I will bounce. Like, I'll write Arionette one day and then I'll go 12 chapters later and write Varric, because like Varric's like a sarcastic, like manipulative, kind of not really decent person. So if I'm really cranky, I'm like, I'm going to go make Varric fuck with some people. But yeah.
But no, that's interesting. That's an interesting insight on your process, because I was going to ask you some questions about process. And you know you have to be very organized, first of all, to do what you just said. How you, like, I'm going to go 12 chapters ahead and write
I
this
don't think
this
it has anything to do with being organized. I think it has to do with thriving in chaos. It's like the
thriving.
opposite of being organized. It's not being overwhelmed by complete disorder and just looking at it and saying, all right, eventually we'll be able to make this all fall into
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
Because there's nothing orderly about the way I write. I use little
Well,
OneNote tabs, and I'll like write a scene on a OneNote tab, and then when I get to that point in the Word doc, I'll copy it over from OneNote and post it in
I was going
Word.
to say, so you do all your work digitally. You don't even do hard copies anymore on paper?
Mm.
Oh, wow.
I do a
I'm
lot of it on my phone. I do sometimes still use my laptop, and I do all my editing on my laptop, but I do a lot of my writing on my phone.
You know what? I have a story that I don't know if I ever shared it with you. I've had it for years. And one day I will draw it, probably as a comic. It's supposed to be like a 6 graphic novel series. And I'm like, let me just try to write it as an actual book, because I'm like, they're a minimum of 100 pages graphic novel each. I'm like, that's a lot of drawing to do. Maybe it's easier to write the other way. Number one, it's not, at least not for me. Um, but I wrote the first 12 pages on my phone, on my break at work. Not the
Mhm.
current job I'm at now, last year. And so what I'm trying to do is like I remember you telling me I think this started with what's the event in November they do, the writing
Oh,
event.
yeah, NaNoWriMo, National Novel
Yeah,
Writing
I
Month.
mean, I don't know if I'm gonna do that, but I'm thinking taking at least one day a week in November just to continue writing to see if I can at least finish this book.
Yeah.
And and but that's the thing. It's like um I don't know. I don't write it on paper anymore. I mean, I write my comics on paper. I write I do sketches that way, but when I'm writing, I don't just take out a pad and write anymore. I'm all digital now and I sit on my phone and just and
Yeah,
that's
I think I was one of the first people to go over to digital because, as I explained before, I have like really terrible, terrible handwriting. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not even like, I can't read it myself. Like, once I get into it, if I start writing fast, I look at it later and I'm like, oh, like, I don't know what this is. So, like, as soon as computers came out, I was like, already writing on the computer.
Yeah.
Like, I, I just got away from paper as fast as I possibly
And
could.
you find OneNote to be a great way to work with?
I
Excuse
like
me.
organizing it. I like starting in OneNote. Like, I'll do my first drafts in OneNote and I'll use the color coded tabs to like
Mhm.
everything that's this point of view goes in this color, and then everything goes for this point of view goes in the other color.
Mhm.
So my first drafts aren't actually a draft. It's just like a bunch of notes.
Yeah.
um, and then I will move them, copy and paste them into
To,
um,
to work.
actually I usually start with Google Docs because I can access it everywhere.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. I've
I'll
done
move
that.
it into Word when it comes time to like format it, which is the worst thing
Yeah, I actually am using I'm Mac based, so I'm using Pages to write my story, and I have Pages on my phone. And what I ended up doing was setting up already the margins of how I envision it being printed so that I
in
can
the world.
get the idea.
I'm really jealous of people who have like Pages and Vellum and all those great Mac softwares that I
Mhm.
don't have, because I'm here like in Word, like, all right, let me highlight all of this and set this to this, and 5 hours later, like I've got 12 pages done. Like, it's a pain in the
Yeah.
neck. But then my friend
And
Eli's like, well, I can do it in Vellum for you. And I'm like, but I have these fairy borders and like you can't put them in vellum, so I'll just waste 400 hours of my time to do it just so I could have those little fairies on the bottom of the pages because I'm nuts.
well, I mean, you should wait till layout. I mean, get the Mac and work in Pages, and then maybe get like InDesign or something and lay it out in
Yeah.
InDesign. This way
Yeah,
you
because
can
I
put
have so
whatever.
much time to learn all this. One day.
Well,
One day
you
when I
know
could
a
charge like
freelancer who knows InDesign. No, I'm just kidding.
I was actually just thinking, I'm like, need any editing done?
So one day I will. Don't worry. um, but let's just get a little bit more into your process. I know I said we do about an hour, a little over, or whatever. It's no big deal. We're coming up to the hour mark now, which is fine. But you have. It seems like you have such an in-depth story. How do you go about world building a story that will be this in-depth?
Um, I have to rein myself in with my world building, to be honest. Like, if I let myself go, I will just build worlds and not write a story.
Mhm.
So I kind of try to just focus on the story and then like build the parts of the world that I need as I do it. Because otherwise, if I opened this closet, there's a notebook, and I'm kidding, it's like this thick. It's like 6 subjects, and it's just full of world building for a book that never got written.
Wow.
Because I just was like, oh, I'm going to create languages and I'm going to create celestial seasons and I'm going to all kinds of stuff. So I don't do that anymore. I
Okay.
no longer create the world before I write. I
Okay.
now write and then create the world as I
That,
go
that's
because
interesting. Go ahead.
I have a problem. No, it's I get like addicted to it. I can't stop.
No, it's interesting because I've taught storytelling. God, I don't even know how long. I've been doing it for almost 20 years. And it's more visual storytelling, because my background being an artist and everything. And so at the end of the day, it's about how do we take a story and bring it to life visually, whether it's through animation, comics, film, whatever. And that's what I'm talking to them. So we usually do like storyboarding, things like that. But I always have my students write a story. I don't want we do practice with some stories that have already been created, and usually things they're not familiar with. So I'm not pulling Harry Potter or something that
Hmm.
old they may not be familiar with, so they can kind of let's see how they build the world. But when they create, I never get the papers in on time because they spend so much time developing the worlds.
Yeah.
And I sometimes fall into that problem too, but I find if you can just have like the story that I was telling you about that I'm trying to write as a book now, is all about magic. Okay, it's a fantasy story. There's a lot of different versions of different types of magic in there. So I didn't create the world itself, although I did spend years researching mythology and stuff because I wanted to have certain aspects to be a certain way. But those were for specific stories that I was like, oh, I wanted to have this myth, be based. So I was researching. But what I did is I had to say, how did magic work in this world? And that's all I sat down and did. And I said,
Hmm.
these are the type of levels, like let's say there's different levels of magic users. Because I never use the term wizards. For it's great for Lord of the Rings and stuff, but I don't like it. I just like the term magic users. And um, I had to say, well, if you're this level, you can only do magic like this. If you're this level, you could do it this way, and so forth, until you're like a master magic user when you have, it's almost like thought now, and you can
Hmm.
make things happen. And you're basically godlike, which no one has that in my story. But I'm just like, that's the type of thing. And I'm like, and from there, and I wrote a few short paragraphs on important worlds of things and like important places, and that's all I did. I may have 2-3 pages of world building for this one story, and that's it.
Yep,
The
that's
rest of
kind
the
of
other
what I
ones I
did.
write.
Yep, with that's what I did with because it was National Novel Writing Month. I had 30 days and I had to write
Mhm,
50,000 words. So I was like, I don't have time to mess around. So I kind of
mhm,
did the same thing. Like the elves, they have two different magic systems. The elves have a magic system where they can like channel nature and use power from any element because they have got this connection to the earth and blah blah gay ass stuff.
mhm,
And whereas the fairies are each bound to their court. So sky fae can only access sky weather like
yeah,
wind and storms and yeah, but like same idea. I was like, all right, I'm gonna give them these powers. I'm gonna create like the world as in like the fairies and stuff are on this side and the mortals are on that side, and then I'm just gonna write the story. I didn't get into all the craziness. It worked better. I'm gonna do it from now on.
no, and I think that works out great. And again, this is just me going into my teacher, like things I tell the kids. I'll show them an old cartoon. I don't know if you even know, but like an old Space Ghost cartoon from the '60s.
Space Ghost. But I
Okay.
remember from when I was older and it was on
And
that that show at
oh,
night.
yeah, you had the Coast to Coast where he was a talk
Yeah,
show
yeah,
host. Yeah. But
yeah.
before that, in the '60s, he was an actual superhero. And in the '80s, he had a show that he was an actual superhero too. But like they were these 6-7 minute shorts where it was set up. Here are his sidekicks. They get into trouble. They get kidnapped by the villain of the story. And Space Ghost has to come in, fight the villain. Maybe he gets captured and he has to find a way to escape. And then they defeat the villain and they live happily ever after for that remainder episode. And I'm like, and that's how I teach storytelling. I teach basic storytelling. I'm like, just create something. The world, all these people now are into reality and believability and like, or not believability. That's the word I like to use. I like to use believability. I don't like to use the word reality, because I don't want stuff to be real. When we were younger, there was a suspension of disbelief. We still need that. Like when I write, I still keep that or try to keep that innocence because I'm writing for kids usually. And I want them to keep that kind of like innocence and use their imagination and pretend there's a guy who can breathe in space, like Space Ghost, and
This
and
is
it's
like, you brought up a thing that's a constant bone of contention between me and my husband, because he is completely incapable of suspending his disbelief, and it infuriates me because he'll ask these stupid questions like, well, that could never actually happen. And I'm like, of course it couldn't actually happen. It's not supposed to be able to actually happen. Just pretend it can actually happen.
that's what it is. Like, when we were kids, when you watch the Smurfs, there's no little blue guys running around to my knowledge, but they were out there, and they did magic, and they built rocket ships out of logs, and it was we were supposed to believe this type of stuff. I don't need. So when I teach, I've always been about believability, and I was wondering, is that because you and I sound like we're very much on the same page. We really haven't talked like in depth in years and had like storytelling conversations and stuff. And I don't know if your process was like that years ago when we were talking. It probably was more the messiness. But
it was a little messier, yeah.
But
you'll notice that story never got finished.
But are you very similar to how I think it's about believability, not bringing reality into the world constantly?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
I want you to be able to visualize it as something that could happen, not as something that like actually could happen. Like, we all know there's no fairy circle where you step in it and you get transported to another world. But I hope to write it at least in a way that people are like, oh wow, this girl got transported to another world through this fairy circle,
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying and agree.
That's interesting. I like to hear how other people work. Usually when I have people on here, they're more artists, and I can sit there and say, "Hey, look, I got my Cola Race black pencil here. I go over this after I've done it in blue or red or whatever it is," and we could talk and geek out on art supplies. But when I'm talking about writing, it's completely different. And
I'm a big character oriented person too. Like, a lot of my plot comes from my characters.
And that's what I was about to ask you. Are your stories more plot driven or character driven?
They're definitely more character driven.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I almost always start with like an idea for like a really basic plot and characters, and then like the plot kind of develops as we go. Yeah. I never actually have like an outline of like scenes that are going to happen or anything like that, which is why I guarantee anyone who reads my book will probably be able to go through and be like, oh, there's a plot hole, because there's probably a plot hole.
I tend to try to write more character driven myself. I always have a basic idea of what the plot is, but I want my characters to drive the story over the plot.
My characters just boss me around. They tell me what they want to do and I write it. Like, that's really what it comes down to. They are in charge of me. I'm not the boss of them.
And it's funny because I'll tell people, like, when I stopped doing the Wiz, it started because I had some medical stuff. I had back in 2019, I had pneumonia, and I'm like, I just needed to take away some of the stress from my life, and trying to do the comic at the time, and I fell behind. I'm like, I need to remove it. But at the same time, I felt like I stopped talking with the Wiz. Like, I was having the conversations with him, and we just weren't talking anymore. And in the past, I've written over, God, in the last 2 months, I've written close to 50 strips. Not all of them gems, but good enough on some of them. But I feel like we've started talking again, and it's nice to be able to have that conversation. It's like
your old friend being back. Yep.
Exactly. It's really nice. So it's interesting how you feel the same way. Like, they're saying, no, this is coming out, and you're like, you're just kind of like the vessel for for these characters.
I won't say who I killed, but I killed one of my characters, and I was like, I never planned to do this. This is like the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. Like, it was absolutely not ever anything I was going to do, but they just made me do it. They drove me to it.
That happens, I've done the same thing. So, characters become annoying, or you're like, just, I'm done with you.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yep,
You're done.
yep, you're going into space without a spacesuit and you're imploding on yourself or something. You know, that's that's how it's happening. So,
Mhm.
but but okay. Um, I'm just trying to think if I wanted to ask you the last question because we kind of talked about it already. Like, you know, let me ask you this question instead. When you started writing book two, all right, like actually started writing the book, were you done with book one already, or were you like you finished? You didn't say like, oh, you know, I'm typing book one, but I need to get this down for book two, and let me type out this whatever, or you do one book at a time.
I did one book at a time.
Okay.
I was writing book two while I was editing book one, and I
Okay.
edited, like, not editing, rewriting basically. Like,
Mhm.
my rough draft was utter chaos. So while I was like fixing book one, I was working on book two. But when I was during like November, the 30 days that I wrote the book, I only
Mhm.
worked on them. I think I threw a couple notes in there that I was like, in book two, this can happen or whatever, like towards the
Mhm.
end. Like, I knew how I wanted book. I wrote my ending like immediately after writing my beginning, and then I filled in the middle. So
Yeah.
I knew where book two was going to start because I knew my ending from the very beginning, but I didn't work on a lot of scenes from it or anything. Because that's another way that I personally have learned I get completely off track. Like, I have to manage myself. It's the same thing with like the world building. Like, if I let myself get off task, I will just
Mhm.
go. Like, then I'll have notes for book five started and I still won't have book one done.
Yeah.
So I'm very disciplined with myself with that. I focus on the project that I'm working on.
That's it. And how long did it take you to write? Because you did book one, you said basically in a month doing this contest. How
Yeah,
long did book two take you to write?
it's about 2 months.
Okay, that's pretty good. You know,
Yeah, for me, the longer part. And book two, honestly, I don't know whether it's because I finished the first book or what, but it was much better put together when I got done with the rough draft. I was like, oh, this is going to be so much easier to like rewrite. Like, the first book was, I had a great, her name is Christina Drevi, and she's a writing coach. And when I finished my rough draft, I was like, I don't know how to fix this. And she was like, listen, we can fix this. And I was like, we can't. It's unfixable. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to publish this book. It's a disaster. It's a mess. And she was
and
like,
this,
no, we can fix this.
this is for the
And
first
we
book.
did. Yeah.
And was that through the contest thing, or how did that work?
I actually met her through the Facebook group of the contest thing.
Hmm.
Um, just on like a post where we were talking about something about like character creation or something, and we just started talking, and then we started messaging each other, and then I found out she was a writing coach, and I was like, listen, I have like 500 manuscripts in my like computer and my boxes in my dresser, and like I never get past the first draft phase. And she was like, well, like, I do a course on that. So I did her course, and
Oh,
it
okay,
was
cool, cool.
fantastic. She's really like the reason I don't just have another manuscript like shoved in my computer.
Hmm. Now November's actually coming up this Sunday, and so since this was just last year, correct? You did the first book. You
Yeah.
want to tell people a little bit about the contest that you did, how it
Oh, thank
works,
God.
and
I thought you were going to ask me if I was going to write another another
no,
book
no,
in
no, no,
November.
no.
And I was like, no,
You
I'm
sound
not
you
ready
sound like
yet.
you're even too busy to think about another book right now.
Yeah, National Novel Writing Month. They're like a nonprofit charity. You can find their website. It's www.nanorimo, WRIMO, I don't know how to say it, .com or .org.
Mhm.
Um, but they also have like a Facebook group. They have like a Twitter. They have all the social media. And it's basically, the idea is to write 50,000 words in 30 days. You can write about whatever you want. It could be a book, it could be short stories, it could be articles. It doesn't matter. The idea is just to write 50,000 words. And their Facebook group is actually like super active,
Mhm.
um, which is super cool because if you're actually trying to write 50,000 words, sometimes you need some like guidance and some venting because it's a lot of words.
Mhm.
Um, and they're a nice group of people, even though their admins are Nazis.
Hope you guys aren't watching, but
it's all right. They've already blocked me like 100 times and deleted my posts. They're like, this is off topic. I'm like, it's not off topic. But anyway, yeah, it's every November. You sign up on the website and you get a whole like profile, and then you can track with their metrics, like how many words you write a day. It saves all your old projects. So when you look at mine, you realize that I've wrote like 17 books and only published 2 of them because the rest of them are never got finished, but I tried. But yeah, so it keeps track of everything, which is kind of cool because you can go back and look at your old projects and stuff.
Cool. And who reads it? Is it just for you, or do you have the ability for other to read?
It's just for you, basically. I mean, there's a lot of groups. Like I'm in, we call it like it started as an accountability group and it turned into a publishing company. Now we're a publishing company. But it started as a National Novel Writing Month accountability group. So there's a lot of that stuff where you can actually go into like the groups and like the Facebook group or the Twitter and say, hey, does anyone want to start an accountability group with me, or can I join someone's accountability group? And then yeah, you guys kind of like harass each other and like talk craft with each other and like force everyone to actually finish writing. Because I don't know about, I know a lot of people say writing is like a solitary thing, but for me it's not. Like I have to talk through my ideas with people, so it's nice to have, I'm sure some of them will watch this video because I know them, a group of people who are like, yes, let's talk about writing all the time. Because it's hard to find those people.
Yeah. And so just to make it clear, so this is something you log into, and I just want to keep it clear for the people watching who want to, write a book and never thought about, oh, do I have the time or whatever. November is National Writers Month, right?
National Novel Writing Month.
Novel Writers Month. Okay, sorry, I want to get that correct. And this website is devoted to help people really get their books completed. And so what happens is you create you sign up, create a profile, and you type within there, or you can copy and paste. Or
you use your own document, and then you just enter your word counts every day, and you can either enter how many words you wrote or your total. You can set it up to work either way, and it tracks it. And then at the end of the event, you submit your document, and it like scrambles it so that nothing else can read it, and verifies that you actually wrote the correct number of words.
Interesting.
So I mean, you could write The Dog Runs Fast, like to make it equal 50,000 words, and it would still say that you won, because you're not actually winning anything except your own. If you want to cheat yourself, that's your.
Yeah, no, I get it. No, it sounds exciting.
You're not winning like a prize.
Yeah, I have a friend who lives out on Long Island, and he's a librarian, but he also writes. And I know he's done this a couple of times. I don't know if he ever finished. We never really talked about it, but he writes very well, and he's got some really great ideas. I don't know if he ever finished it or not, but I know he's tried this a couple of times, and it's good motivation, for me as an artist. For those who are artists watching, like you said, people find it to be a solitary job, but for you, it's not. For me, I love being alone. I love drawing, but every now and then I need to show my work to someone just to give me that push. And I got a couple of friends who I'll be like, what do you think of this? And they'll be like, oh no, it's great. Or I don't like this part of it. And I send it to the ones I know give me honest critiques. And when that happens for me, it's inspiration, it's motivation to continue working. Because I could, I know a lot of artists can be this way, and I know I come across as a very happy guy, but I'm probably one of the most self-deprecating people you've ever met. And I look at all my work and I'll be like, I'm a genius, and then I look at it a second later, I suck. And
yeah, that's the story of my life, so I understand.
So I look at all that stuff and I'm just constantly on myself, and it's like, oh, should I even be picking up a pencil anymore? And so showing it to these people give me the motivation, the encouragement. So I understand what it means, but it, for me, it really is, for me, my work is very personal. Everything I do, it's like with you as a writer, with me as an writer, illustrator, whatever you want to call me, we kind of wear our hearts on our sleeves. We're putting out this stuff in hopes people are going to like it, and they're not going to say you're the worst thing that ever, why are you breathing type of stuff. That's what we're
I
not
got
hoping.
a 3-star review. It was only a 3-star review, and it like crushed my spirit. I was like, I'm not going to write book 2. My book's I got a 3-star review. And everyone's like, you got 1 3-star review. Like,
Yeah.
It's really not that big a deal. And I'm like, no, they said it was horrible. Like, they're like, they didn't even say it was horrible. They said it lacked depth. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. No, but it's good. It's good to have that.
Love it.
Yeah, but it's good to have that motivation. And for those who are aspiring writers or people who just feel they don't have the time, the website, what is it? NaNoWriMo.
NaNoWriMo.org.
Okay. NaNoWriMo is a great way to get motivated to try it out, at least, and if you stop for whatever reason, you stop, but if you can keep going, cool. Hopefully it gives you inspiration. I mean, you got your first book out of it. How great is that?
Yep.
And you just completed your second, which is coming out in what, 2 weeks now?
Yeah, I guess I should finish formatting it, huh?
Yeah. 2 weeks, and you can pre-order on the link that's on there. And you're gonna have a third, obviously, because it's a trilogy, plus however many novellas you're gonna do out of it. So this is, excuse me, something that's gonna be with you for a while, and something you're very passionate about, which is great.
I hope to finish the 3rd one in September and then not even look at the series for a while and write something completely different. I have a whole like dragon shifter romance idea, so
okay.
I just have to make it through that 3rd book, because I'm like, it's hard being creative because you have all these ideas and you're like, but wait, it's going to take me at least 6 months to work on any of these projects. So like, I need to.
You just brought, I have binders and folders behind me and things underneath here. And I literally have, I would say, maybe 60 stories that I've plotted out, written stuff to, drawn sketches to. And, I'm 44 years old. Am I ever going to get 60 books out of me?
There's no way I'm going to live to write all the things that I have written down in my book to write.
So you just got to pick the ones that you love the most. And that's why, like I had to go with Dax, which I really love, and I'm just dying to draw it. But I'm like, I can't write it. I need to find someone. I knew usually I like to do it all myself, but I'm like, I need someone else to do this. Otherwise, I know it's not getting done. And I love the character and I love the idea I have so much that I'm like, let someone else write it. I'll just draw it. So it's good. Sometimes you got to give away that freedom, or that control, to have the freedom to do the other things you want to do.
Yep. It's better to have it do that than to have it never ever get done.
Exactly. So I think what I'm going to do is just kind of wrap up now, because we've almost gone an hour and a half. Like which is great. Yeah. I gotta say, I do say this a lot to all the artists, but it's very inspiring to talk with someone like you. And I always mean it when I talk with the artists, because it just makes me want to go and draw. But I want to write my story now. I really sit here just talking about writing, talking about things, and I love, don't get me wrong, I love writing. I love literature. Like I said, I read more biographies, but I love classical literature. I love mythology. I love the fantasy world. And I wish I could read more fantasy in my life. And like I said, your book really interests me, so I'm hoping to, at some point this year, purchase it so I can read it. But it's just one of those things where it's like, you see someone, or you hear, or you talk to someone like you, who you just wanted to do it, so you did it. And it's like, yeah, I want to do that too. So no one's going to get it done unless I get off my butt and do it. It's not going to get done. So I got to make it a priority in some way, which is why I'm hoping in November to at least put one day aside a week just to write. If I can put a little each day, that's cool, but it's going to be and if I get the book done, I'm shooting for something small, 100 pages, 120 pages, nothing crazy,
Yeah.
for book one. But it's still going to be 6 books, you know. So it's
So you've got a couple Novembers ahead of you, right?
yeah, a couple of them. Anyway, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to drop you backstage for a moment. I had a great time chatting, and it's always good catching up. So thank you, and you guys check her out on Facebook at Kate Seger author, and check out her book. Go pre-order on Amazon, and if you haven't read the first book, click on her author page, and you can get her first book off Amazon. All right. Well, thank you for coming on again. I will talk to you in a little bit. All right, guys. I had a great time tonight. It was really fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys got inspired to write, whether it's fantasy, romance, whatever. Write romance for Kate's mom. You know, do something, you know, and just be creative. You know, it's a great time. I know we're coming out, we're not coming out. We've been out of kind of quarantine, and people are still home. People are still, some are afraid. This is a time to be creative. This is the time to use, you know, use your imagination and bring something to life, you know. Anyway, next week is election day. I know everybody's been excited about that, and I'm probably not going to be on the air next week. I haven't decided yet. One of the things I've been thinking about doing is bringing on a political cartoonist, not to talk politics, but to talk about drawing politics. However, next week's going to be one of the busiest days of the year for them. So none of them have been able to commit. So if I can't get any political cartoonists for next week, we're going to just skip a week of Get in Tune, and I'll be back actually with a really, really cool one. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's going to be me and a few cartoonists. And what's that date? It's not the 3rd, it's the 10th, right? Me and a few cartoonists on the 10th are going to be getting together and just fanboying out about comic strips, maybe even some books, things that we loved growing up, things that inspired us, you know, Peanuts, Hagar the Horrible, Superman, whatever it is. We're going to just fanboy out, and you're going to have some really cool cartoonists on. Some I've interviewed before, some I haven't. So tune in definitely on the 10th, but keep checking my Facebook page, getintune.net, to see if I'm going to be coming on next week. You guys, thanks a lot for tuning in. Don't forget to check out Kate's Facebook page, Kate Seger, author, and don't forget to go in the links and pre-order her book. All right, guys, have a great week, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.